Hello and welcome to the Ordinary Discipleship Podcast. I have two of my friends with me today. We have Geoff and Cyd Holsclaw, and we are going to talk about their amazing new book, Landscapes of the Soul, which talks about attachment theory. And you guys know I'm all brain science and how we communicate with each other, how we work together. So I'm really excited to have Geoff and Cyd on. Would you guys take a minute and just introduce yourselves to our audience here?
Well, we are your new friends. So that's probably the most important thing that people need to know about us. We've been married for 25 years and we've been pastors together. We do some ministry stuff together outside of churches. We've launching two young men into the world. One of them is 22 and the other one is turning 21 soon. And we live in Michigan, and Geoff is excited that the Cubs are in the playoffs, and I'm trying to tame my garden for the fall. And that's kind of what life looks like for us on a daily basis right now. Because, we don't work because we work at home. So everybody thinks that when you work at home, you don't actually do anything. So
So, Geoff, what do you do here?
What do I do here? I mostly just add a lot of competitive spirit around board games and card games. And I am celebrating that the Cubs are in the postseason, but that'll probably, by the time this airs, they'll probably have already lost, but that's fine. I don't know, I'm like the big researchy nerd, and Cyd's the much more practical one, but I'm growing in my practical social emotional skills.
and
That's
I'm
what I
growing
bring
in my
here.
research. So we're evening each other out.
That's right.
So
That's right.
probably the most the question that's probably top of everybody's mind right now is Ticket to Ride or Catan.
Ticket to Ride.
Neither. I mean, I like both. I
If
like
I had
both,
to
but we haven't
choose.
played either one in forever. So our friends got us. We have recently become F1 racing fans, and our friends got us a racing board game called Heat, which is incredibly well done as a board game, and it has recently brought up all the unsanctified I get grumpy when I'm losing aspects, which I thought I had mostly dealt with, but I definitely have not.
Well, so if you're out
Cyd is a
there and you are
witness.
wondering what is the best Christmas present, you heard it here. You heard it here. Heat, the board game that brings out all of your marital
Heat the
family
board game.
angst so that you now have something to
Mhm.
talk to your therapist about. Thought you were good?
And for the actual board game interested people, it comes with like multiple like advanced levels. Like there's a kind of an easy starter edition, and then it gets like more difficult. You could add layers to it. It's actually very fun. So when I'm not very frustrated.
And he's usually very frustrated because I seem to have a winning streak on this game.
Oh man, we took it
And
on
he re
vacation. She
and
beat me like 9 times in a row. It
and he
was
doesn't want to acknowledge that there's any skill involved. I'm just getting lucky.
How can you wait? What's most fascinating to me right now about this is
oh
that I
man.
would not play a game I have just lost 9 times in a row. I'd be like, no, this game is over. Like we are done. You can just know that you're the winner forever, and we're gonna find something else. Now, if I win 9 times in a row and my husband Bob stops playing, then he's just kind of a sore loser. But for me, like I will give you the title and the trophy and crown, and I'm done losing. Well, let's talk about your book for, some time here cuz your book is it's beautiful. I think it's so clear. It's so well written, and as someone like I just really value those kinds of texts that you can hand to somebody else, and they don't need a degree in anything in order to read it. I'm glad to see that there are more of those out there than there used to be. Everything used to require interpretation. But for our listeners who haven't probably read your book yet, The Landscape of the Soul, will you tell us how you think about attachment theory and the beautiful way that you describe the different strategies that we have in trying to cope with life?
Well, we like to think of attachment theory. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can explain it and describe it, but I think I like to talk about it in the steps required in order to build it, because that like makes it very practical and tangible. So we're talking about the relationship between a child and their attachment figure. So the family that they're born into, usually most often. And the way that attachment gets built is through a combination of a joyful connection upon arrival into this world. So, baby is born, parents are thrilled, there's joy, there's gladness to be with, baby is happy to be with family, family is happy to be with baby. So, there's this joyful connection, lots of shared smiles and affection. And then on top of that joyful connection, that foundation has built these two capacities for intimacy and independence in the child. And that is done through a parenting combination of offering care and sort of attunement to your child, helping them to feel felt and seen and known and understood. And then also offering them gentle challenges and encouragement to go out into the world and to explore. And so through those dynamics, a kid builds intimacy and independence, these equal capacities. And then through those intimacy and independence capacities, things end up going wrong, which then introduces this process of rupture and repair. So things go wrong, and then those ruptures in their intimacy or in their independence are then repaired, and if there's a good rhythm of rupture and repair, then that builds into the child these defaults of someone is available to me at all times. And this distress that I'm currently enduring is going to go away at some point. It's not going to last forever. And I actually have some power over my life in this world. Like when I can act in the world and the world, and I can influence the world around me. And so when those defaults then are like intact in that way, then that's what we would say is a securely attached child who then spends their life living in the pasture, the green pasture with the good shepherd, based on Psalm 23, where the Lord is my shepherd and I lack nothing. Just the confidence that he's with me even in the darkest places and that I dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And so that's how I would I know it's a little longer than one sentence, but it feels like a sort of a very robust understanding of what we're talking about with how attachment forms, how it happens, and then because your listeners are brain science people, I assume, because you are, the way that that impacts our nervous system for the rest of our lives is that, we have this general sense of safety in our own bodies, this general sense of like, I have what it takes in the world. And so I can take risks, and I can also seek comfort. And yeah, it's just this very secure feeling of I am worthy of connection and belonging, and the world is somewhat okay, and I can go explore it.
And it's not gonna destroy me.
Right. It's not gonna destroy me. I'm not a passive victim of the world. I'm actually an actor. I'm an agent.
Yeah.
I'm a participant.
So what are how would you guys
Mm.
describe then the two insecure attachment conditions and strategies?
Well, what Sid was talking about, the development of capacities for intimacy and independence, and you can kind of put those on a grid. So if you have like high capacity for both connecting with people and receiving that connection of independence, as well as high capacity for independence. Did I get that right? Did I say that wrong? Intimacy and independence. That would be like in the pasture, right? So, but you could think of this grid as people having high capacity or high longing for intimacy, but low maybe capacity for independence, or the reverse. So, so we call someone in the jungle who, for different reasons, usually inattentive or inconsistent care. They're someone who their body and nervous system, their whole way of processing the world is prioritizing relationships, and sometimes that's called becoming hyper vigilant. And so they're pursuing intimacy in relationships in some fashion. And they usually kind of sacrifice then their independence because of that. The jungle, well, maybe you should be talking about the jungle, right? What, you want to jump in and fill that one out?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
it's sort of a your priority, your way of protecting yourself because these are protection strategies, right? Living in the pasture is more of like, because your nervous system can either protect yourself or connect with others, but doesn't do a very good job of doing both of those things at the same time. So, pasture life is like I can be connected with people as like I can offer connection as my priority much of the time. Of course, I'm still going to protect myself at times, but these other landscapes or these non-secure attachments are sort of protection strategies that you've come up with. And so the jungle protection strategy is to stay in relationship connected to your people at all costs. And so that can look like compromising your own needs, compromising your own values, doing things or not saying things that are important to you because you don't want to risk the connection that you have with another person. And that hypervigilance comes in the sense of like, I am going to watch my people at all times and make sure that my people are okay and that we're connected. And the moment we're disconnected, it's probably because I wasn't watching or I wasn't vigilant enough or something I did caused the problem. So people in the jungle tend to blame themselves for when things go wrong in their relationship, and they tend to prioritize the relationship over all else. So there aren't any rules, there aren't any standards. It's hard to recognize patterns because you want to see everything as unique and specific for the sake of staying connected. So those are sort of some of the markers of a jungle attachment, which in the attachment literature, it would be the preoccupied or the anxious. That would be the
Nice. I
jungle.
love I love that you use the illustration of the jungle because almost everything can kill you in a jungle. Like, it's just not a safe place.
Yes. And you have to be on your guard at all times. You have to
Yeah.
be aware and alert.
But also in a jungle, you could have many majestic encounters with waterfalls or, the birds, right? So it's both high highs and low lows that could switch on it in an instant.
Mhm.
Um, and for us, we kind of use that metaphor, that landscape metaphor, because you can't see that far in a jungle, right? So you're really in the moment, always just kind of reacting. And so that's kind of like a metaphor for how the relation, like you and your relationships kind of function: high highs, low lows, in the moment, reacting. So then the opposite would be the desert. So the metaphor for the desert is something that is very regular, right? The sun is hot. If you're exposed to the sun in the middle of the day, you will get burned. Water is scarce, right? These things are regular and reliable. You plan for them. And if you don't plan for them, then, you know, it's your fault, is kind of the idea. And you can also think of like the desert as a relational wasteland, right? So your relationships are not deep. You're on your own in one sense. And so this is the world where you prioritize independence at the expense of intimacy. So this comes from a caregiving environment, typically where maybe your physical needs were taken care of, but maybe not. Um, but your social emotional kind of life was not cared for, acknowledged. It certainly wasn't fostered. It wasn't like helped to grow. Maybe you were ignored when you kind of either cried or gave out kind of emotional information, however you expressed your emotions. You were maybe ignored, or you were outright punished, like told that part of you is not welcome here. And so obviously when you receive that kind of message long enough, then that part of you just kind of dies or just kind of goes away, right? So that's kind of slowly going into the desert. And so in the desert, you learn that um, your actions are most important, that you're kind of on your own. If I need help, I will do it myself. That the world is very kind of regulated by rules. And so instead of like the jungle where relationships are way more important than any rules, in the desert, the rules are most important. I figured out how the world works. I follow the rules. It keeps me at the appropriate distance from people. So the rules are more important than relationships. The way this worked out, like as a practical example, in our family was around bedtime. And I'm sure listeners with young children, they understand that that's always some crisis moment every single day. And so I was someone in the desert, and Cyd and I had organized. We've decided what bedtime would look like, what the order would be, when it would start, when it would for sure finish. So that is the rule. We've decided on the rule. So then I see Cyd putting the kids down and she's not following the rules. I was like, and she's like in the jungle. She's like, they wanted one more book and we were cuddling and it was so precious. How could I
Oh,
stop? Right. So the rules aren't as important as the relationship. And I'm like, no, the rule was the rule. This is good for everybody if we just follow this rule, and I'm looking at her like she just can't, whatever. She's a terrible mother. And she's looking at me as, you're a terrible father. Like, I can't believe you don't want to be with your children. Murr. Right. So we're living in different landscapes, trying to parent our kids. And we really are looking at the world, all these experiences, all this information, we're looking at it totally differently. And so that's kind of, um, once we started realizing that for each other, we're like, oh, if we can have compassion for each other and ourselves in the way we view the world, and then help hopefully grow toward a secure attachment, that'd be great. And really the book is all about how can we do that spiritually too.
And so on that note,
Yeah.
before we leave that, I just wanna leave the little statement here. Because Jeff's priority for the rules, we came up with the phrase, "You're technically right, but you're relationally wrong." So, of like, yes, that is the rule, that technically that is right, but in this moment, it's you're not doing your relationships any favors by clinging to that particular rule in this moment. I'm not necessarily referring to bedtime, but, some of the other moments.
And you guys described the disorganized strategy, which is no strategy slash all the strategies in the puzzle box mixed together as a wasteland. How does that manifest?
Yeah, we actually, talk about it as a war zone because it's this conflict, right? This experience of conflict both outside of you and inside of you. And so, you're conflicted between, I really wanna be close with people, I want that intimacy, but I'm also
Mhm.
really scared of it. And so I'm moving toward, and that often comes from an environment where there's been active abuse or extreme neglect, where you need to move toward the people that can help you, but they're also often the people that are hurting you, or you're experiencing some kind of pain in their presence. And so that conflict outside of you becomes internalized, and you end up with a conflict inside of you where you're going back and forth. And this is where, an understanding of parts is really helpful, where you have a part of you that really wants to attach with other people. But then you have this other part of you that just feels like it has to live in defensive mode all the time. And so attachment is terrifying. And so that conflict within, is what we call the
Yeah,
war
and
zone.
it just totally makes me think of like a World War One landscape. I mean, given that that's my default, like relationships, sure, maybe I can walk over here and maybe I'm just gonna get blown up. You don't really know,
Yeah,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
the food cache is
yeah,
over
Hmm.
there. So what are you gonna do?
yeah. You're going to risk your own life and limb to get to the thing that you know is going to
Yeah.
keep you alive.
So I love the descriptions of the different landscapes because it creates an embodied understanding of what it's like to live in these different states. For you all, why did you feel like it was important to describe and create landscapes as a description for these different states of attachment or strategies? Because there is attachment literature out there, right? So you can read the clinical description, you can read a relational description, but you guys took the time to paint pictures. And I just want to like hear from your heart, or why did you think it was important to do that and add it to the conversation?
For me, I'm a visual learner. And Sid and I are both like teachers at heart, right? So we're always like, how can we communicate this? How can we put it like on the bottom shelf so that people, and like, Jesse, like if you read enough attachment literature, oh my gosh, it is like pretty dense. People use the same words differently or use different words to explain it. Like it's all over the place. And there's reasons for that, which we don't have to get into, right? So part of it was, instead of kind of deciding on, well, are we going to use this language instead of this language or this, like, we're just like, what if we just create a different language? And for me, it was really important to kind of have like a really sticky way of explaining it. And so I think the jungle and the desert kind of came pretty early. We were like, oh yeah, those are like, people will get that. And I've been really encouraged because we have a friend who does a lot of like international missions work, and he says he's already using it like all over the world. He's like, you can just talk about a jungle, like anyone in the world has some sort of image of a jungle and a desert and a war zone. And so it's just really easy to like get into conversation. So that's been really encouraging. Um, so that's kind of I'm just like trying to teach myself these things. So that's for me where it came from. I don't know what you want to add, Sid, to that.
Yeah, for me, I think it was really important to find language that felt more neutral, to describe where people
Yes.
find themselves, because I know my experience of reading about attachment when I first read about it was pretty devastating. It was like, You are insecure and broken and anxious, and here's how all of your relationships are going to be twisted. And here's how it was just really discouraging to me. Like it was like an aha, like, oh, this is what I'm experiencing. But it was also just felt really like you're anxious. You're anxious all the time. You're preoccupied. You're anxious. And it just felt like I already had enough sort of shame and frustration with my life not working the way that I wanted it to, that then to have sort of these feelings compounded on top of it just felt like, oh, and then like if you're in the desert, you're avoidant, you're dismissive. They're just really negative ways of understanding. And it's sort of like, the language that we try to use throughout the book is that these are strategies, and there's so much wisdom in the strategy that you developed because you're here. And so to be able to think about, like, well, yeah, if you grew up in a jungle, of course you developed skills and tools to survive in a jungle. That just makes sense. It's logical. And so we don't need to automatically put it into this shameful place of like, and here are all the labels that we can use to describe you because of the way that you survived. It's more like, well, can we just honor those strategies that you developed and see that there's actually incredible gifts that you have to offer the world because of these survival strategies that you developed? And then can we also round out your strategies because you might feel like you're living in a jungle, but you're actually living in a pasture? And so how can we help you start to lay down or to pick
Mm.
up, sort of if the only thing that you have available to you is a machete, life is gonna look a particular way. But if you also have, like, protection from the hot sun, and if you also have ways to find green pasture, like, then you have more options. You're not just going through your whole life using a machete. And so that's what felt important to me, and it also resonated with my experience of living with Jeff, of, like, the way that he sees and experiences the world isn't necessarily inherently better or worse than the way that I see and experience the world. They're just radically different. And so it just felt like we are approaching the world as if it is a different place. And so that just made sense to me of like, well, yeah, if I'm living like I'm in a jungle and you're living like you're in a desert, it's no wonder we want to do different things and we have different perspectives on what's happening around us. That just makes sense. So that's why it was important to me to sort of remove some of the clinical diagnostic kind of language.
That's really beautiful. What I love about that is just the honor that you give to each of those different strategies. As a war zone, I've grown up in a war zone. I mean, literally, there was violence in my home and things like that. Like, and then I married somebody who was securely attached. Like, I had no grid for the reality that he operated in. So, unfortunately, one of us was
Mhm.
right and the other one was wrong about how to live in the world. But he can be right about things. But it was such an education to to sit next to somebody and experience that they understood the world in a completely different way that I just had no
Yeah.
imagination for, and occasionally struggle. I mean, I've earned
Mhm.
secure attachment at this point, but after being married 22 years, but still there are moments I'm like, wait, you don't worry about that? You don't question that? You don't struggle with that? I
Mm.
don't even,
Mhm.
yeah, it's sometimes there are places he lives that I can't even imagine, so but I love the way that you guys honor
Yeah.
each other in that dynamic and find there is value to the different, coping strategies, dealing with life strategies, so
Mhm.
you could what was something that you learned from each other that you're like, "Oh, that's actually a good thing. I'm gonna maybe if I don't know how to do it, I'm at least gonna make space for it."
Yeah, well, I think
Mm.
one of the things I learned from Jeff was, the ability to sort of step outside of my experience and look at it. Like, Jeff is better, like we talked about, when you're in a jungle, you're immersed in your experience, right? It's only the present moment. You can't see very far. And I think, and there's some trauma in my background as well. And so it was like, when when your past has invaded your present and you're living in the present moment as if something in the past is still going on. I think the thing that Geoff has helped me to be able to do is say, okay, wait a minute. This is not an appropriate response for the situation that I'm in, or like something is going on here that's making me react wildly to this. How can I step outside of it? Sort of give myself some perspective, more of that desert long view, and be able to say, okay, what is going on here that's beyond this moment? And how can I observe myself rather than only experience myself? And so I think that was something that was a real strength of his that I was lacking. And so that, and then that there's been a lot of growth that comes from that ability to step outside of my experience and observe myself. I mean, it's huge.
My journey is kind of like the opposite, where I would either internally or I'd say it out loud, which was never helpful, which is, well, you shouldn't feel that way about this situation. Right. Which is, again, it's like, well, telling people that doesn't help. So I think that was kind of my journey, was be like, hey, I need, for myself included, but then also just with, whether it's with my children or with Sid or with other people, like being in the moment, in the emotion with people and allowing that to be okay without rushing to the whatever else needs to be going on. So that's that movement to be more present. All sorts of things we could say about that, but yeah, that's the main kind of thing, and that's what we our kind of hope. And this is where, like what Sid said, is like it's not really in the attachment literature, which is there's good things about these attachment strategies, the insecure attachment strategies, and so we, it's like they're not bad, they're lopsided. And they helped you survive when you were a child, but they're not necessarily helping you thrive as an adult in the relationships you have. And how do you thrive where you're at now is to have a more balanced kind of toolkit for how you live life. And that's what secure attachment gives you, is the ability to pursue intimacy with the right tools in a life-giving way, or to practice intimacy in the right way, and to do both those two things together and to be able to toggle between them effectively is what we need to thrive. And the insecure attachments, especially the jungle and the desert, they kind of get lopsided. And then the war zone, like you said, just has a conflict, like it's grabbing for tools and it doesn't even know why, and then it's throwing them away even though it worked 5 minutes ago, and then you're like, so it's just all over the place. And so how do we kind of become people who can use all the tools at the right time in the right way, is kind of the goal.
So, for you guys then, how long into your relationship did it take for you to realize that you were seeing the world a different way? And then how long, like when did you learn to appreciate the way that the other person saw? Just to give a little bit of the timeline grid for our listeners.
Oh, probably right away. So we didn't have any of this attachment language for 15 plus years into our marriage, but I think pretty quick, right? Said we're like,
Oh,
oh yeah,
yeah.
like we're seeing, like literally our first year of marriage, I would blurt out to Sid, "I'm not your dad. Stop projecting that stuff on me." Right? Which is one of those things where it's like, that's probably technically true. She probably was projecting on me. But in the moment, like I couldn't say a dumber thing, right? So I think pretty soon we were, I don't know, that's my sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think mine right away was like, we moved to a new place, and we're meeting all these new people, and I'm watching Geoff interact with people he doesn't know, and I'm just like, you're so like the way that you approach people and treat people and think about people is just so foreign to me. It makes no sense whatsoever, and like, like some of the social niceties and things was just like I had only known him in a context where he knew people, and so watching him try to get to know people of just like, this is how you do relationships. This is weird. And, just those simple things like that, where it's just like, I don't understand you at all. And like, it's just, yeah, I mean, very quickly, it was like, you make no sense to me.
Yeah.
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 Oh, man. Well, that's gonna encourage someone out there, I think. I feel like, "Oh, you don't understand them because 'cause they're in a different place in the attachment, landscape, and, you can find each other. You can create a space together."
Yeah.
Well, to shift gears just a little bit, I have experienced critiques from people who are kind of against psychology. So, as an ordained minister, and you guys teach at a seminary, people who are interested and care about spiritual formation, there's a paradigm out there where anything besides the Bible is just off limits. It's the human invention, and that we only need the Bible, and that everything we need is in Scripture, and so anything else is an addition to Scripture. So I don't know if you guys have encountered that, but what do you think about that,
Sure.
and why do you think it's important for those of us who are interested in spiritual formation? We want to be disciple makers. We want to help other people be changed by Jesus. Why do you think it's important for us to know about attachment and about how we form relationships?
So I was raised fundamentalist, so I was much more in that, like, anti-psychology. So on the one hand, I do want to give an understanding of that perspective, because when you look at the historical roots of psychology and even some parts of sociology, others, like, they were coming out of the Enlightenment, and they were kind of militantly anti-Christian, anti-religion. Like, their goal was to overthrow religion, right? So there's there's a reason for this antagonism. Now, I don't think we have to live in that antagonism. I think all those fields have actually matured out of those kind of very anti-religious roots, and most of them have basically, like, figured out, oh, a core piece of humanity is spirituality and religion in some fashion. Like, we can't, like, against their hopes and dreams to get rid of religion,
They
they've
prove
figured
it,
out that,
right?
like,
They
it just is
accidentally
going to
prove it.
persist. Yeah, yeah. It's just so. But some kind of churches, denominations, and kind of theological traditions kind of haven't moved past those ugly days of antagonism, so they still live there. So that'd be one of just like, hey, psychology's kind of earned the antagonism a little bit. So, but I think we've outgrown that. Partly the reason why I'm so drawn to attachment theory is because it kind of lives in a parallel universe to a lot of the psychological theories. Um, and not to go into the history of all this stuff but it is kind of, the name is attachment theory, but it's actually very data driven. Like, it's, instead of theorizing about, stuff the way Freud did by just talking to patients and then making up theories. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth and others, they're just like, hey, let's watch children and see how they interact with their parents. And then when they're in distress, what do they do? And then when the distress gets alleviated, what do they do? And let's just, right. So it was very data driven, very observation driven, which I find, super helpful. And so so in that sense, I think it has like more of an actual scientific background. And then I know Jessie, you're very much into the neuroscience, like, and I think attachment theory has dovetailed with our neuroscience findings so easily, so clearly. So there's a lot of, like, really good science behind it. So, and then Sid, I'll let you kind of fill this in. But for me, like, when in John 1:14 it says, and the word took on flesh and dwelt among us. And there's so many other things in scripture too, but there's a powerful affirmation of us created in God's image with our human bodies that are essential for this path of discipleship, of salvation, of sanctification, whatever words you use for that. And Jesus did not scorn having a physical body. And so, what can we learn about how God has made us to help supercharge or align or partner with what God's trying to do with us as whole beings? And so that's always kind of my conviction, is we've kind of lived in a certain enlightenment anti-body trajectory for so long that's kind of done harm, and it's actually made us read the Bible poorly. So a lot of times when people are like, oh, I just want to read the Bible, you're like, well, you're reading the Bible in a certain way that's kind of bad. And some of this attachment and neuroscience, like when we teach people attachment and neuroscience, they're like, oh, the Bible's like, it's coming alive for me again. And it's because it helps you see all the very embodied, very relational aspects that have always been there, but part of our Western tradition has
Right,
been.
because if you read scripture from an avoidant attachment paradigm, you will read an avoidant attachment God, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Which then downplays emotions and downplays embodiment. There was a guy who I think was avoidant attachment at one of our previous churches. We would do the public reading of scripture. He would always read angry, like his tone of voice was always stern and angry. And we're like, I'm not sure God sounds like that. Like, you're reading a joyful psalm. It shouldn't sound so down, right? But I think like he's just kind of like you said, you have this kind of avoidant attachment, which you bring into your reading and practice of scripture, and it just becomes self-reinforcing. So for sure.
Yeah, I would answer the same way. Just basically like when we can I think it's so important because when we can like create and offer discipleship pathways for people that are in line with the way that our brains and bodies are designed to function. Like, yeah, like Geoff used the word supercharged, right? We can supercharge our faith rather than trying to work against our design. And because we find ourselves in different attachment landscapes, we need different things in order to grow in our discipleship too. And so that's the other thing that I think is really important is that so much of the time, in a particular church community, it's like, this is the path of discipleship. These are the things that we all need to be doing. And, here's the formula and here's the plug and play. And then you find yourself going, I don't have the same experience that everybody around me seems to have. What is wrong with me? Why am I not able to connect with this like other people are? Which doesn't do anybody any favors because it's not actually that you're not able to connect with God or that you're not able to grow. It's just that you're being given a pathway that isn't necessarily meeting you where you are and helping you move into the pasture. Yeah, and going back to like what you said, when you read scripture through your attachment lenses and through the filters that you have, like I used to hear Jesus's tone of voice as pretty stern and
Mm.
irritated most of the time, right? So even coming to Bartimaeus and saying like, "What do you want me to do for you?" is very different than like, "What do you want me to do for you?" Right? Totally different tones of voice, but when we read scripture, we hear what we're reading. We visualize what we're reading. Like our minds and our imaginations are actively at play when we're reading scripture. And so if we're not aware of how our views of the world and ourselves and of other people and of God have been shaped by the stories we've lived, then it's no wonder we have so many voracious arguments about what scripture means.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in again, but like one example of often like the Bible only crowd, and I loved this verse growing up. It was Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. See, it's our thoughts that matter. It's our thoughts. We must have true doctrine and right belief. And then
Mm.
from that will flow right behavior. Um, right. So you grab onto that, and then we just totally forget that Paul in the previous verse had just said, therefore, in view of God's great mercy, offer your what? Your bodies as a living sacrifice. Right. So it's like Paul brought bodies and minds and like all this together. And the most compelling neuroscience is always saying like the best way to change your mind is always through embodied kind of things, which is partly why we wanted to go with these landscapes. Like imagine your body, yourself in a landscape interacting with all this, right? So we change our minds through our bodies. And Paul knew that, and the New Testament knew that, the Old Testament knew this. It's just us in our certain of our kind of streams. And so that's why I find like the neuroscience and attachment so compelling, is it really does help us
Right.
read the
I mean,
Bible
it is
better.
your autobiographical memory system.
Mhm.
It's just that it's that
Yeah.
and mostly that. But I love the way that you guys are talking about. If for those of you who have heard me for a while, you know that I always also am like just like Cyd. We need to work with the way God designed us. And that's because I've spent 2 decades coaching disciple makers and pastors, and they are very sincere with a lot of effort and a lot of intentionality. But their practices, because of the way they've been taught in that disembodiment, disenchanted Reformation kind of, Enlightenment paradigm, they just spend a lot of effort working against our biology and working against our design. And and then are just really disappointed, and then the enemy shames them, that they're not good at their job or they're doing it wrong, and there's something wrong with them. So yeah, for me, it's let's do it God's way because He actually set us up for success, and healing and wholeness
Yeah.
and transformation is really possible. So if you guys would have
Mm.
one
Amen.
exhortation
Amen.
that you would give to a ministry leader or just an ordinary disciple who's like, I should I dip my toe in the waters of these different landscapes of the soul. I'm afraid of where it's going to take me, and I'm just not sure if everybody's going to think I'm crazy, or I'm going to discover something that's just going to really be disruptive for me. Like, what would your encouragement be to people who would be considering exploring the different landscapes of the soul?
Yeah, my encouragement would be I think something in you already knows that you want something more and that, there is something deeper and something more beautiful that maybe you haven't quite yet reached or accessed. You might get something might get disrupted, but I mean we worked really hard at making the whole tone of the book one of compassion and hope, in that, Jesus does not meet you with any condemnation. He's not going to like sit and scold you and criticize you for where you are, but instead meet you with such tenderness and compassion and kindness, and attune to you right then and there, and then gently move you, deeper and further into the pasture. And so I mean, yeah, my life was disrupted when I first learned about attachment, but I hate to I'll just brag on it. I think if I had read Landscapes of the Soul as my introduction to attachment, I would have had a very different experience. And I think the disruption in my life would have felt like a really hopeful and generous surprise, rather than the massive undoing, that it ended up being. So I know that was my heart in writing the book was how can you be exposed to this and learn this in a way that gives you greater hope rather than discourages
Mhm.
you?
Along with what Sid just said there about hope, I think moving from like condemnation to compassion is we can either oftentimes we condemn ourselves because we're like, oh, I did that thing again, or I responded in a way that I'm not proud of, or I'm just like just languishing in life or whatever. Right. So or, and then sometimes it's an or. Uh, we look at other people and we condemn them for just seeing the world differently and then responding differently. So Sid and I, when it comes to parenting, I would just condemn Sid for just being that like soft hearted, willy nilly mom who, wouldn't follow the rules or whatever. Right? I'm condemning her and she's condemning me because like Jeff's so hard on everybody all the time. And he just, right. So can we move out of that condemnation of either self condemnation or other condemnation to like a place of compassion for how it is that we respond and understanding, like, oh yeah, I can see why I do that. But then also then having a goal or some place that we want to head toward for the healing and the hope that
Mm.
God has for us.
So good. Well, if somebody wants to get your book, where can they go? How can they find more of you?
So Landscapes of the Soul, you can get anywhere where your books are sold. You can also go to our website, embodiedfaith.life. You can find the big new book tab. But that's also where you can find our podcast, my writings on Substack, and the different cohorts and things we do. So that's embodiedfaith.life. Otherwise, just Landscapes of the Soul.
Wonderful. Well, it has been so great having you guys on. I really appreciate you being here with me today and just sharing your heart and your wisdom and your very beautiful book. Just really appreciate that. And I know it's going to bless everyone who reads it. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie.
Yeah,
And if you
thank
want,
you.
you can check out more of the Ordinary Discipleship podcast and the resources that we have on whoology.co. That's WHOOLOGY.co. There's actually an assessment on there for your community and where you land in the attachment landscape. And yeah, we can't wait to have you back again. See you soon.